Well, here we are with the best and worst movies of 2021. Sadly, there are no 10 out of 10 movies, but, over time there may be, and plus we'll work with what we have. Alright, let's get this started. Number 20 in my top 20 list is The Card Counter, directed by Paul Schrader. This is a fairly conventional, well, not really conventional, but familiar. It's a familiar, well-done crime drama about a gambler with a dark past taking a youngster under his wing. I thought some scenes could have had better pacing, and some of the writing definitely felt overdone, especially with this side character who's just annoying. If you see this, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. But still, I think Schrader did a good job writing and directing overall. He actually uses some very interesting visual choices and shots. The acting is really good, especially from Oscar Isaac, and it really engrossed me into this world of gambling and the main character's backstory, despite not containing a lot of action. Some people may find it boring, but when in the right mood, this is an interesting movie to watch. Next, at number 19, we got No Time to Die, which is Daniel Craig's last James Bond movie. The worst part about this, for me, is that the villain is really bad. Rami Malek does the best he can with what he's given, but this character isn't understandable in terms of motivations or goals, and it kind of messed up the finale a little bit. That being said, I don't really have any major problems with this movie other than some characters being underused. It does what Bond movies should do. It looks great, it has some really exciting action sequences, and despite the long runtime, it felt really well paced. The emotional stakes, while a bit cliche, worked for what they were, and I'm really glad that Daniel Craig's run as James Bond ended on, we'll say, a unique note. Last Night in Soho, directed by Edgar Wright. This movie has a fair amount of criticisms against it, and I completely get it. The supernatural elements kind of work only when it's convenient for the plot, the themes are heavy-handed, and the emotional hook this movie uses to get me to care about the characters is a little bit manipulative, but at the same time I appreciate what the movie's doing. It's basically serving as a deconstruction of nostalgia by showing how some romanticized periods of time, in this case 1960s London, were really seedy and messed up under their glitz and glamour. Again, it does feel heavy-handed in the way they do it, but it still felt effective and interesting. The acting from Thomasin McKenzie and Anya Taylor-Joy is excellent. The mystery aspect to the plot was actually really well done and engrossing, and I just love the look of the movie. Edgar Wright knows what he's doing visually. The cinematography, sets, lighting, costumes, they all look fantastic. I may like it less upon more viewings, but for now, I think it's a good movie. Lamb is a movie from Iceland, and it's number 17 on my list. It's a really strange movie about a farming couple adopting a half-sheep, half-human hybrid. Really, really weird, but also really good. It's a really simple but also really effective movie because the quality of the filmmaking is just stellar. You understand everything that's going on and you never feel lost. I only saw it once, but I remember pretty much everything that happens. Like, I can recite the plot line by line. I read that this made the Oscars shortlist for Best Foreign Language Film, so I'm really hoping it gets nominated. I highly recommend this one, and who knows, some people in my theater actually found the lamb-human hybrid cute, so you might too. The only criticisms I have is that some of the CGI looked fake and that ending shot felt cliche as hell, but in an artistic way. An artsy film cliche is looking directly into the lens. I usually do it myself. Number 16 is The French Dispatch, an anthology movie directed by Wes Anderson. The first time I saw this, the emotional moments or themes felt scattershot, so I didn't really feel anything by the ending. But the more I watch it, the more I like it, and the more I feel like I understand what it's trying to be, which is essentially a giant love letter to journalists, and how the events they witness affects their lives and how they affect others. I think that's... I can definitely put that into better words, I just can't think of them up right now. Even for a Wes Anderson movie, this feels very unique. Guillermo del Toro once said that anthology movies are only as good as their weakest story, and I thought all the stories in this film were highly entertaining and funny. All of the actors in this giant, unbelievable cast are excellent, especially Benicio del Toro and Jeffrey Wright. Alexandre Desplat's score is wonderful, and cinematically, Anderson did a fantastic job. It looks amazing visually, and I really like how it feels like he's adding new elements to his already already iconic style. I think this film will be seen over time as a standout in Anderson's filmography, and I am just really excited to see how he tops this in terms of ambition. Number 15, we have The Suicide Squad, written and directed by James Gunn. It's my favorite summer blockbuster I've seen this year, and it's everything I wanted the first Suicide Squad to be. There are some pacing issues and also some cheesy bits, but it's hard for me to think of anything I would change. The comedy and the action are excellent. The characters, especially Idris Elba, John Cena, and Daniela Melchior, all have their moments to stand out and be memorable. And I really like how Gunn walks this fine line of having absurdist elements but using them in a serious way which actually works. Like, the main villain Starro the Conqueror as a concept is completely ridiculous, but Gunn manages to present him in a way that's kind of Lovecraftian. It's everything a blockbuster should be. It's Gunn's vision and his understanding of what audiences want that makes this film as entertaining as it is. This didn't make nearly as much money as it should have, but I really hope that it's remembered as the superior Suicide Squad. Next, we have The Mitchells vs. the Machines, which is a very charming animated movie on Netflix. For some people, this should be higher on the list, but the reason it isn't for me is simply that the story feels like a been there, done that thing. We've seen this type of story before, so it isn't as effective for me here. That being said, a lot about this movie works. The animation is great, the characters are funny, maybe with the exception of the brother. His dinosaur shtick felt a little overdone, no matter how relatable it was. Still, I like the characters, especially the father character. The general humor of this movie is just hilarious, and it feels very modern, like it's almost as if its scenes can't be made into memes because they already are memes. And despite all the cheesy moments, you can tell it comes from a heartfelt place, so it's forgivable. Overall, I really like this movie. Also, I'm kind of obsessed with that pug. Number 13 is Spider-Man No Way Home. Okay, I get any criticisms it may have, I really do, but as a lifelong fan of Spider-Man, this movie was just a joy to watch. Before I saw it, I had this notion that it was a detriment that it was revisiting old elements of the franchise instead of exploring new territory, but it really does explore new territory here. The story, first of all, is uniquely ambitious, and I was surprised at just how emotional and bittersweet it was compared to the previous two, which were very light in tone. I love the acting, Tom Holland was great, and it was also amazing to see Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin and Alfred Molina as Doc Ock in the same movie. They did a fantastic job. The fan service was well done too. Occasionally went overboard, but for the most part it managed to feel fluent and natural for the story. It's an event movie with heart, and sometimes there's nothing bad to really be said about movies like that. All I can say is that if you're a Spider-Man fan, you will love this movie, and if not, it still may work for you if you have enough context. Number 12, we have Saint Maud, directed by Rose Glass, which is a really effective horror movie. Maybe a bit heavy-handed in its delivery of theme, but in terms of execution, it's really disturbing and messed up. It essentially works as a character study for this lonely woman using religion as a crux, and how she almost always punishes herself and the people around her because of that. The religious aspects felt really well done. I really like how they depict God, and how the character's state of mind is visually represented as being very violent and self-harmful, rather than graceful as religion should be. I just really felt uneasy through a lot of it. The main actress, Morfydd Clark, was great, and that ending is just messed up, as if that won't convince you to watch this. Number 11, we have Shiva Baby. I have a theory that in an alternate universe, this is Charlie Kaufman and the Safdie brothers working on the same script. It's basically a young Jewish woman stuck in a very uncomfortable, very awkward, very tense family gathering, and it's both hilarious and nerve-wracking. I really liked how uncomfortably relatable it was, how the tension just increases as the movie goes on, and how this main character is always put on the spot and confronted with questions that she's just not ready for. All of the characters are on their own level, and it creates dozens of scenes where there's just chaos happening, and that really increased its relatability for me. Really good acting and directing, and the music was very good too. It was almost like something that belonged in Saint Maud. Alright, top 10. Here we go. Number 10 is The Last Duel, directed by Ridley Scott. I love historical epics, especially when they're done by Ridley Scott. It's a very good looking movie with great performances from the cast, and it also has a really unique structure. It's like Rashomon basically, where it's various points of view telling this big story. Matt Damon and Adam Driver played these two enemies who are very self-centered, so their points of view are very biased in their favor, and it creates a good dichotomy for moments that are re-shown from their separate points of view. Many of the characters, especially the men, are pretty unlikable, but the reason you care about what happens to them is because you get to care about Jodie Comer's character, who goes through a horrible experience and ultimately finds the courage to stand up for herself in a time where women wouldn't. Her fate is tied with Matt Damon, so you hope that he'll manage to beat Adam Driver. Overall, really good movie. It's a shame it didn't make much money, and I'd recommend checking it out. Number 9 is Red Rocket, which is a film by Sean Baker. This is about a washed-up adult film actor named Mikey Saber returning to his hometown and basically causing havoc everywhere he goes. This main guy, Mikey, he's very charming and fun, but he's also very narcissistic, and he takes advantage of almost everyone he comes in contact with. He's like a con artist basically. He just hustles to get what he wants. And while you may not like this character, the movie does a great job at getting you engrossed into who this guy is and his world, as well as making you wonder what exactly is going to happen to him by the end. Simon Rex plays Mikey so well, and other than him there are two actresses, Susanna Sun and Brie Elrod, who are excellent as well. It's well shot, it's really funny in a twisted sort of way, and Baker did a great job at making the setting feel lived in. This movie may not be for everyone because it explores some taboo subjects, but I thought it was excellent all the same. Number 8 is Nightmare Alley, directed by Guillermo del Toro. I thought the pacing was a bit sluggish at times, but other than that, I don't have any major problems with this. It's probably the darkest thing I've seen all year. There were moments where I was just taken aback at what was happening on screen. That being said, you don't feel sad by the ending. It's actually poetic, so don't worry. Del Toro is just an amazing filmmaker. Pretty much everything he makes is beautiful, and this is no exception. The sets and cinematography are so impressive in their look. It really captured the grime of that setting and that time period, but it did it in a way where it still had that Del Toro flair of beauty. The cast is absolutely excellent, and I actually think Bradley Cooper gave his best performance in this. He plays this really charming but ultimately really flawed character, and he's so good in the role. I think this is like the third movie in a row where the main character is unlikable. What's this pattern supposed to be? Number 7 is The Green Knight, which is a really good fantasy movie directed by David Lowery. What really makes this movie interesting is that it's a pretty faithful adaptation of the original story, but at the same time it's a giant deconstruction of it, as well as the whole King Arthur mythos. The main character, Gawain, is shown to be almost the exact opposite of what a knight should be and what he himself wants to be. King Arthur is also in the movie, but he's portrayed as a sick old man on the verge of death, basically. There is no action. Any scenes involving fights or stuff like that are really quick, and they have a clumsiness to them. All of the tropes that are associated with these kinds of stories are completely flipped on their heads, and even the fantasy elements aren't portrayed as 100% certain. It's almost psychedelic, which I was not expecting. Beyond that, the acting is great, especially Dev Patel. The Green Knight himself is such a mesmerizing character, both because of the acting and the makeup, and really it's just a beautiful looking movie. There are tons of great lighting and practical effects. You can see where every cent of the budget went, and it wasn't even that big of a budget. There are several scenes in this movie where I just thought to myself, that's what pure cinema is. Beautiful movie overall. Number 6, we have Judas and the Black Messiah, directed by Shaka King. This actually won some Oscars already, but it came out in 2021, so it counts. This is an excellent drama and double biopic, which is one about Fred Hampton and his work with the Black Panthers, and on the other end is about Bill O'Neill and how he served as the FBI's informant on Hampton. To get political for a little bit, this movie basically serves as a re-evaluation of the Black Panther Party, who are mostly remembered in a negative light, and the movie doesn't shy away from the more sordid stuff that they're known for, but at the same time, the movie makes a ton of effort to show that the Panthers did good things, many of them specifically because of Hampton. Hampton is shown to be someone who deeply cares about social justice to the point where he's willing to make decisions that other Panthers wouldn't. There's a scene where he makes a speech which seemingly is encouraging violence, but after that, when O'Neill offers to bomb a building for him, he flat out refuses because he doesn't actually want to hurt anyone. He's just shown to be a really moral person who stands up for what he believes in. And then on the other end, there's O'Neill, who in the beginning doesn't believe in anything, but as he gets closer to Hampton, he starts to become more and more invested in his ideals, and it makes him feel much more guilty about what he's doing. It's really good drama, and it's a testament for how well made and engrossing the movie is. The writing and directing is excellent, the cinematography is great, and the acting from Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield is actually amazing. This is just a really well done drama, and it was actually number 1 on my list for a long while, but I saw the following 5 movies. Number 5 is Dune, directed by Denis Villeneuve, and it is hands down the most cinematic movie I've seen this year. I watched the original version, and that movie was so bad that it actually made me nervous about how this one was going to turn out, but I'll be damned if I didn't say the movie did its job very well. There are minimal problems, but that's mostly because the source material is so large and this is only part 1 of a 2-part story. It does really feel like this is the best possible adaptation of the book. The performances, the sets, the visual effects, Hans Zimmer's score, just the construction of the story's universe from page to screen makes everything about it feel so unique compared to any other film in the genre. The visuals, I cannot put into words how perfectly shot this film is. You can tell that Denis loves this story, and you can see how elements of this story has influenced him in his past work. I think of the aliens in Arrival and how that now feels so directly inspired by the feelings of awe and terror for the sandworms. That level of passion for this story is exactly what makes Denis the perfect director. He knocked it out of the park. I thought this was an excellent film overall, and I cannot wait to see part 2. Number 4 is The Power of the Dog, directed by Jane Campion. This is an excellent western with layers that I actually wasn't expecting. I feel like the less I say about this movie's plot, the better, but I will say that there isn't really any action in this movie. It's very slow and subtle in its execution, but when you pay attention, you can see that there's a lot happening. I love just analyzing the characters and the subtle drama of certain scenes. There's this one scene with Kirsten Dunst playing the piano and Cumberbatch is playing the banjo, and it's one of the most riveting scenes I've seen all year. The acting is fantastic, Benedict Cumberbatch, of course, but also Kirsten Dunst and Cody Smith-McPhee give really great performances. On top of that, the cinematography and Johnny Greenwood's score really stand out and help strengthen the nuanced approach the movie does so well. Number 3 is Licorice Pizza, the newest film by Paul Thomas Anderson. After mostly making straight-up dramas, Anderson went back to the basics almost and made this, which is kind of a spiritual sequel to Punch Drunk Love in my opinion. It's basically a rom-com, but it's given an interesting angle, since the main plot is about this relationship between Gary, who's a very impulsive / ambitious 15-year-old kid, and Alana, who's a 25-year-old woman trying to figure her life out. That might sound creepy, but the relationship is actually very sweet, and the movie itself has a very light tone. Their relationship is a romance, but it's more like a platonic relationship. There's sexual tension and they get jealous of each other when they see other people, which happens often in the movie, but they still care about each other and they feel inseparable. Basically, they don't belong together, but they're made for each other at the same time. The actors who play them, Cooper Hoffman and Alana Haim, are both excellent. The supporting cast is great as well, even though most of them only show up for 10 minutes. Sean Penn, Tom Waits, Benny Safdie, Bradley Cooper, who's especially great because he acts like a psychopath and he gets some of the biggest laughs of the entire movie. It's probably the most lighthearted thing Anderson has ever done, and pretty much everything about it works except for this one really bad joke that didn't need to be used at all. Great movie besides that. Number 2 is The Tragedy of Macbeth, directed by Joel Coen of the Coen brothers. I think Ethan retired. This is an incredible adaptation of Macbeth. Everything about it is so beautiful and cinematic, it's breathtaking to be honest. Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand act their asses off. They are just in complete command whenever they're on screen. They might have given the best performances of the year, to be honest. The way it's directed too is incredible. Joel basically filmed it in a way where it looked like everything was happening on this giant theater stage. There's no natural setting, and it gives the film a pure Shakespearean feel, which I don't think any other adaptation of Macbeth has captured. Every scene and every actor has a captivating theatricality, and there are no dull moments to make this movie lose its momentum. It's all just incredible filmmaking, and I can't wait to see it again because there's so much to take away from it. My favorite movie of the year may be surprising. It certainly surprised me. Number 1 is West Side Story, the remake directed by Steven Spielberg. I really wasn't expecting to like this as much as I did, but my god, this is just as good, maybe even better than the original West Side Story. Everything great about Spielberg's filmmaking is on full display here. I actually think it's his best film since Catch Me If You Can. Apparently, he's wanted to do a musical all his life. Now he's done it, and he did a fantastic job. The musical numbers are great. Some are actually more creative in their staging than the original, especially America and Maria. On top of that, each of the characters are given something new that makes them feel fresh, and it made scenes that were already done in the original feel much more effective and tragic. And I really like how much of the story is recontextualized to be slightly more political. Like, the neighborhood in the movie is shown being torn down so that they can build the Lincoln Center, and seeing these demolished buildings as the backdrop to certain scenes feels very poetic. That's one of the reasons why I like it so much. While it was doing the same story, it was doing it through a different lens and totally being its own thing. All of the actors are great, the cinematography is beautiful, I mean, the opening shot alone is amazing. And it feels like the perfect mix between a tribute to films of the past while at the same time being modern and politically correct. I've only seen it once, so I'm gonna give it a 9 for now, but upon second viewing, and I can't wait for a second viewing, it may very well be a 10. I watched Music, the Oscar bait autism movie directed by Sia, and that was absolutely the worst thing I've seen all year. There's some effort on display, but it feels so shallow and false in what it's trying to do or say. The representation of autism was just offensive. All of the actors are extremely bad, but I mostly blame it on Sia's directing than them, but still, extremely bad performances. The musical numbers feel so out of place. They weren't even originally supposed to be in the movie, they were just put in after the fact to make the movie more marketable. And they're not even good, they're just sensory overload. This was basically Sia just making a movie because of her ego, and the fact that all of these red flags were showing up and she didn't think to reevaluate them just doesn't make her look good as a director. If I could sum up this movie in one word, it would be insulting. Tom and Jerry? Just stop. Awake, I talked about this in my Netflix video. Space Jam: A New Legacy, I talked about this before, but I watched it a second time. It's so much worse than I remembered. The Unholy. What an unholy mess. I only watched the movie so I could make that joke. Movie's just as terrible. Sweet Girl, a really boring, really bland action movie with no originality to it. It's probably the most boring thing I've seen all year. I don't really have anything else to say about it. It's just so boring. Demonic. This is directed by Neil Blomkamp, who made District 9. I am shocked at how terrible this movie is. It's basically just a bland, unoriginal horror movie coupled with a very weak sci-fi concept, and it doesn't actually add anything to the story. And again, the gap in quality with this director's other work is just jarring. Chaos Walking, it's basically a failed start to a franchise. There were elements with potential, but nothing is done with them in a creative way. In fact, there were a lot of stupid moments. I will say that the actors did their best though. Lockdown, I talked about this already. It's actually by the same director of Chaos Walking, by the way. The Tomorrow War. The best thing I can say about this movie is that there were some good visual effects and some fun action sequences, but in like a stupid way. That being said, the story is so formulaic and dated. They introduce a logic for the time travel, but they almost never follow it. It's not funny, the emotional scenes are just cheesy as hell, there are tons of stupid moments, and I hated the slow-mo shots. Free Guy. This is Ryan Reynolds continuing his shtick that he started with Deadpool, and at this point I'm starting to get sick of it. There were some good ideas and moments of action, but it's also very juvenile and kind of shallow in terms of writing. Taika Waititi was my favorite part of the whole thing, but I don't even think he was that good. And the pop culture references. Jeez, I hated the pop culture references. Just imagine all of the worst jokes in Deadpool without the fourth wall breaks coupled with Ready Player One, and you have this. The little things. I feel kind of bad for talking about this movie in this section because the director spent 20 years trying to get this made. Still, I'm gonna be honest about my opinion, which is that the actors are good, but this movie is just so boring. It's all about these two detectives trying to find a serial killer, but you never feel that sense of tension where there's a killer out there, we need to stop him. You never feel that. I barely remember anything about it. I guess they tried their best, but ultimately this movie is unremarkable, terribly paced, and just bad. F9. Terrible title. Even for a Fast and Furious movie, which I like as dumb action movies, this just went overboard. It went overboard in its stupidity. There are some funny moments, but I was kind of bored most of the time, which is something that I never want a Fast and Furious movie to do. Willy's Wonderland. Really disappointing. Nicolas Cage is genuinely good, and whenever he's on screen just acting or fighting demons, it's entertaining. But when he's not, it's basically just a cheap-looking, badly acted horror movie. Army of the Dead, I talked about this in my Netflix video too. Red Notice, it wasn't as terrible as I thought it would be, but it's still really bad. I'll talk about it in my next Netflix video. Without Remorse, I talked about this movie already. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I think the Conjuring movies have lost their jam. It just feels contrived at this point. That's all I have to say about this. Eternals, I talked about this already, may talk about it more, because the more I think about it, the less I like it. Prisoners of the Ghostland. Much like Willy's Wonderland, it was very disappointing. It looks cool, the production design is excellent, and it also has some good sword fights, and Nicolas Cage is just entertaining to watch. But I still think this movie failed to be 100% entertaining or interesting or even bonkers like its marketing was trying to push. Old, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. There were some interesting ideas and cool scenes, and I imagine under a different direction they would be much more effective. But as it is, everything bad that's associated with Shyamalan is in this. Weak acting, bad dialogue, and a dumb twist ending. Still better than The Happening though. Black Widow. I like some of the new characters, but this just feels so bland. It also has probably the most hilariously bad moment of the entire MCU. Black Widow can't kill the bad guy, literally because she can smell him. Seriously. The Matrix Resurrections. It's about as good as the other Matrix sequels in my opinion, but at least it's the most interesting out of all of them. I do wish that the cinematography was slightly more inventive though. Don't Look Up. This was somehow worse than I thought it was going to be. I'll talk about it in my next Netflix video. Luca. I understand some people like this a lot, but this movie kind of stinks in my opinion. The animation is good, and there are some good emotional moments, but I was just asking the entire time, why is this so bland? None of the humor works, in fact it just gets annoying. None of the characters are remarkable except for one voiced by Sacha Baron Cohen, but he just shows up for one scene. I also thought there were dozens of missed opportunities that the movie could have done to make itself better. I feel like I could go on and on about this movie, but for now I'll just say that it isn't that good. Venom Let There Be Carnage. It's a guilty pleasure movie just like the first Venom. It's also technically better than the first one, but it's also somehow more stupid. The editing and pacing was distractingly fast. Carnage didn't feel as fleshed out as he should have been, but I really like the interactions between Venom and Tom Hardy. They're just fun. Mortal Kombat. Same thing as Venom, it's a guilty pleasure movie. The writing is definitely dumb, but there's still some really fun action, and whenever Scorpion and Sub-Zero were on screen, the movie got a lot better. Cherry, I was looking forward to this because it's the Russo brothers working with Tom Holland, who's playing a mature role, which I know he can pull off, and he does pull off. Tom Holland is great in this, but the movie itself was disappointing. There are several creative decisions which don't work for the story. I don't even know if I would call them bad under the right circumstances, they just don't work. And it either switches between being something that's trying to be like a Tarantino movie, or just pure monotonous misery. It definitely needed a different artistic approach to work. Malignant, this movie is stupid as hell, but it's ambitious, it went for it, so I respect it. Most of the acting and writing was bad, and the ending was kind of abrupt, but I really like the look of the movie and just how bonkers it got. I guess I have to watch it again to get a stronger opinion on it, I don't know. Malcom and Marie, I talked about this in my Netflix video. Those Who Wish Me Dead. This is a movie directed by Taylor Sheridan, who also wrote Without Remorse. It's a well-made thriller, but it's also really dull, and unless you want to see a cool forest fire sequence, there's really no reason to watch it. Being the Ricardos, I don't have a lot to say about it other than then I expect better from Aaron Sorkin. House of Gucci, it's an interesting story and the cast is great, but the pacing is all over the place. It either rushes through interesting plot beats or it just stays on them for too long. I think it probably would have worked better as like a miniseries. Cruella, I talked about this before, and I don't consider it to be a good movie, but there's something oddly appealing and rewatchable about it. Jungle Cruise, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. The writing isn't the best, but I still actually kind of like this movie. It's basically a combination of Indiana Jones, Pirates of the Caribbean, and The Mummy, and those were movies I loved growing up. The action is fun, the actors are entertaining, and there were actually some creative decisions. It's just a charming blockbuster, and sometimes there's nothing wrong with movies being like that. Godzilla vs. Kong, another charming blockbuster. This didn't take itself nearly as seriously as Godzilla King of the Monsters, and I think it benefited from that. The human characters aren't interesting at all, but a good chunk of time is given to Godzilla and Kong. Kong especially is given a lot of personality. The fight scenes are all cool and well framed. It's just a fun time. Concrete Cowboy, this is a fairly standard drama on Netflix. The community in the film is real, and I thought it was interesting how they were incorporated into the story. The main problem for me is the main plot, which is basically a repeat of Boys in the Hood. I wish they changed it up a bit so that it wasn't just Boys in the Hood again. Belfast, directed by Kenneth Branagh of Artemis Fowl fame. It was okay. I don't remember that much about it except for some cool visual choices and specific plot points. The actress who played the mom was really good. Bottom line is that I wouldn't call it bad. In the Heights, pretty good musical. The staging of the numbers and the acting was really good. Zola, it's an interesting story, but the execution is somewhat scattershot for me. The acting was great, especially Riley Keough and Colman Domingo, and there were several funny moments. Raya and the Last Dragon. It's a Disney movie, it looks great, it's got good music, but surprisingly the best element of this was the characters. They were all really well written, well voiced, three-dimensional characters, and they weren't annoying, which is surprising because one of them is a baby who babbles all the time. The only downside is that the main plot is predictable as hell, and in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really stand out among other Disney classics. Coda, again, I don't have a lot to say about this except that it's technically good. Good acting, interesting if not predictable story, and yeah, good. Bad Trip. I love Eric Andre's style of humor, and the comedy in this is really hilarious, especially since they were able to get such great reactions from unsuspecting bystanders. The only issue for me is that it felt like the movie was missing something. When you look at something like Borat and Bruno, those movies have great pranks too, but they also have a satirical edge that makes them stand out and be even more hilarious. Bad Trip doesn't really have anything other than its humor, but luckily the humor is hilarious. Shang-Chi. This is a really entertaining Marvel movie. I like how it explores something new. Tony Leung played an excellent villain. The action is good. I'm actually looking forward to what they do in the sequel, so I'll leave it at that. The Courier. I like this one. It didn't really have the emotional punch it wanted to have at the end, but it's still a really interesting story, and Cumberbatch did a great job as usual. Summertime. This is a film by the director of Blindspotting, so I watched it. It's a very interesting collection of performance art scenes by various artists in Los Angeles. Some of the segments are weaker than others, but it's still interesting to watch. Annette. A very bonkers musical. The main problem with this movie is that it takes a while for it to actually get going, so I think the first half should have been paced better. Adam Driver and Marion Cotillard are great, the music by Sparks is really good, and for all the bonkers artistic choices that they go with, they usually work very well. Candyman. This was not as good as the original Candyman. It's a bit heavy-handed in its delivery, and there are moments where I was like, What? But other than that, Nia DaCosta's direction is great, the acting is great, and what this movie is exploring is very interesting and effective. By the ending, I felt like it did its job. The Sparks Brothers is a documentary about Sparks, directed by Edgar Wright. Sparks are just really fascinating subjects, so yeah, I was really invested in this documentary. My main problem is that it doesn't go into much detail about their personal lives, it just follows their career, and I think it would help me connect with them more if I knew something about their lives, but instead they just go with their careers. Luckily though, that's enough because they're really fascinating. Nobody. Really fun action movie. Most of the people involved with the John Wick movies made this, so the action sequences are very cool and there are some really good characters. Bob Odenkirk did a great against type performance, and Yeah, Beans is a movie from Canada, and it's a coming-of-age story about this young Native American girl being caught in a really tumultuous event. There are some coming-of-age cliches that brought some scenes down for me, but I think this overall was a really interesting, heartfelt movie. There are also some really effective scenes, like I actually had a physical reaction to a certain scene in the latter half. Pig, a really strange but heartfelt drama about a retired chef looking for his kidnapped truffle pig. There are some writing issues for me, but the movie works overall. Nicolas Cage is unironically great in this. I would consider this one of his best performances. The Harder They Fall, it's very reminiscent of Django Unchained, meaning that it's overall entertaining and well acted. I do wish the more dramatic elements to the story felt more balanced and natural, but I still had a really fun time with this. And finally, at number 21, Tick Tick Boom. It kind of gives away the ending at the beginning, so I don't think I was as invested as the movie wanted me to be, but Andrew Garfield is great, all of the musical numbers stand out in their own unique way, and it was just a really well-made movie. Well, that's it. Another year gone by. What does the future hold? What does the future bear? The answer is I have no goddamn clue, I just know Batman's happening again.
It'll stop any day now.